Today I'm going to answer a question from one of my followers over on Patreon. Now, Claire asked the question, how do you avoid making a watery mess in the palette? She says, I watch your videos and you seem to manage this so well without getting the paper towel out every 5 minutes. And it's quite simple really. It's what's left in the palette is actually an extra colour. That's how I see it. You don't want to be washing your palette out all the time. It's use what's in there. And I'll try and explain this in a little bit more detail as the video goes on. Just talk you through what I've got in my palette. Now I've got some Payne's Grey just up there in the top left. I don't use that very often, but it's there in case I need it. And then I've got the three blues, ultramarine, cobalt and cerulean. I kind of see them as one colour really. They're just the blues to me. Top right there is just some alizarin crimson. There's some permanent magenta, similar colour, but the magenta's a bit browner. There's some light red, Indian yellow. It's just like a bright yellow, like a lemon or Hansa yellow, and then at the bottom raw sienna, burnt sienna, and some viridian. Now, getting on to what's left in the palette. I always just leave what's there from a previous painting, and you see kind of like in the top left there and the bottom right, they're blues, and it's kind of make a blue grey. Top right there, that's kind of like some yellowy green that's left behind, and you can add to that and it makes perfect nice toned down colours. In the bottom left, that's possibly a bit of burnt sienna and raw sienna, and you can add to that and it just tones down the colour that's left from pure pigment essentially. Now I'll do a demo and I'll use a lot of this that's left behind in the palette, and I'll just start by wetting the paper just with the mist bottle. Get it quite wet all over. I'm going to do quite a loose little seascape, and I'm just going to use the size 10 sable brush. And just start by adding some ultramarine and cobalt just to what's left behind in the palette there, and you can see it kind of instantly tones down the brightness of the blue. And I honestly think that kind of using the paint that's left in the palette it's essential really to getting kind of like a natural looking painting. If you're always using pure pigment straight out of the tube, it can be a little bit too bright. And so I just grab it and even digging the brush in to the edges of the palette there. For some reason the darker sort of greys always seem to linger around in the corners of the palette. But I'm just going to bring a very sort of loose sky down, keeping the cloud shape sort of larger at the top of the page and then smaller and more horizontal down towards the horizon. And I've just grabbed some raw sienna and I've mixed that in to what was sort of like left over in the palette before, which was probably a bit of raw sienna and some burnt sienna. And you can see it's toned down the brightness of the sort of neat raw sienna that's straight out of the tube. And again, it just gives a more kind of natural kind of look. And I'll just sort of kind of grab a little bit of everything that's on the palette there. Add some ultramarine to it and a bit more kind of burnt sienna. And that'll grey it off a bit. And drag some of that raw sienna into it as well. And again, it just gives kind of like quite a nice natural cloud coloured kind of grey. And I'll just put a bit of alizarin crimson into it as well. and just allowing all the paint to sort of blend together on the sheet. A nice kind of soft wet into wet sky. This is a quick kind of demonstration version of a painting that I did the other day of Lyme Bay in Dorset. It's kind of looking across Charmouth Beach over towards Lyme Regis. It's a lovely place. And that's kind of like a maybe a bit of Indian yellow and possibly some Viridian and some blue that's left behind from a previous painting. And I'll just drop a bit of cobalt blue into that, and it gives kind of like a green, possibly slightly sea coloured green, I suppose. But you should be able to see, well, hopefully you can see that by mixing the sort of fresh tube paint in with what's left on the palette, it just acts to tone everything down and gives kind of like quite a harmonious feel. And I'll just bring the sea up roughly to where the horizon is going to be. Don't want too hard an edge for horizon on this one. Kind of almost want the sky and the sea to blend together. Just drop a tiny little bit more of that blue. Just allow it all to run down. I'll just mix up a bit of colour for the sand. So some burnt sienna, some raw sienna. And again, mix it in with everything that's left on the palette. And I'll leave behind a few small areas of white. Kind of just suggest some waves maybe. And add a slightly darker area on that sand. Maybe suggest that it's slightly wet. And I'll leave behind a few areas unpainted again on that sand area. And that'll be apparent in a little while. I'll turn that into some rocks. I'll just switch to the smaller brush. I'm just very lightly going to sort of mark out a headland. And then while that sky area is still wet, it should soften off quite nicely. It's a scene I've painted quite a few times before, so I know the shape of this headland. And there are a few kind of like buildings and rooftops that stick out across there, so I'll leave a few areas unpainted. And there's kind of like an area of rocks that run through the middle of the beach there at Charmouth, where the river runs out into the sea. I'm sort of just very kind of roughly scrubbing in some slightly darker areas across that sand and leaving it kind of slightly mottled, I suppose. And like I said, it'll become apparent while I'm doing this, and you'll see that you can turn these shapes into rocks quite simply. But I'll show you how to do that once the painting's dry. Again, some slightly darker paint, and just sort of very randomly putting that in, and then just leaving some areas of the wash underneath showing through. and just suggest a little bit of that colour in the sea there. Okay, so that's the first wash done, so we'll let that dry. I'm just going to re-wet just the lower 2/3 of the beach, and I've swapped to the small mop brush, and I've just gone back into that blue mix that's left in the palette there, and I'm going to reinforce the shape of that headland. And just darken it ever so slightly, just with a touch of burnt sienna. Okay, I think I'll switch back to the small sable brush and just leave a few areas unpainted just to suggest the buildings there, and then very lightly bring it off onto the horizon line, and you've got the cob running off into the distance over at Lyme Regis. And just mix a little bit of darker paint, ultramarine burnt sienna again, and then just put into like a few suggestions of rocks. I'll just give that a quick mist, just stop any hard edges from forming. I'll switch now to an even smaller brush, that's a size 2 sable. Really just a few random kind of lines, dots and dashes. Trying to kind of work with perspective at the same time, and basically bringing it along with the line of the beach. Okay, just mix up some even darker paint, and some burnt sienna and ultramarine again. And we'll just start putting in some of the areas of the rocks that I mentioned before, and you can see where I've left the lighter patches. If you just put a line underneath those and just pick them out, random sort of shapes within that area, just by adding a touch of shadow underneath, kind of gives the impression that it's a little bit of a rocky beach. Now obviously I'm doing this quite quickly for the sake of the demonstration, but if you take a bit more time about it, you can really get some quite good effects. But even putting them in this quickly, I think it still does give the impression that there's quite a few quite large rocks on the beach there. And just looking at what's left there from the previous wash and just trying to work with that and just find little areas that I can add a shadow underneath. And just a few kind of tiny little dots and marks as well, just suggest some smaller stones. And I'll just go back into that blue, slightly darken that headland just towards the bottom. And like I said before, there are a few kind of like rooftops that stick out in between the trees along there. I think I'll leave the demo at that. Let's just take the tape off and have a little look at the finished picture. Oh, there you go. That's the. I mean, I kind of almost think of it as being like an extra colour on my palette, really. What's left behind from previous paintings. Very rarely wash my palette unless I'm looking for maybe like a very kind of bright yellow or raw sienna type effect. But more often than not, especially with landscape painting, the fact that it's kind of toned down just adds more harmony for me anyway. So I hope you like that. Hope you got something from it. And please give it a try. Let me know what you think, or if you have any questions at all. I'll be back again next week with another video. And so if you've got anything you'd like me to cover, let me know and I'll see if I can make it happen. Well, please subscribe and give the video a like, and I'll see you next week. Happy painting.